the last few months. Focusing on a record.
Morning. Today is December 14th, 2023. The time is 10:01 a.m. This is the duly called meeting of the Texas Low-Level Radioactive Waste Disposal Compact Commission. I am Brandon Hurley, the chairman of the commission. Thank you all of you who are attending here in person today. You get free coffee. People online do not. So that's the only benefit of showing up in person, I guess. But we appreciate everyone attending today, both online and in person. For those of you online, I'll remind you that if you want to say something during today's meeting, there is a function at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says raise your hand. And so if you would use that to notify us that you would like to speak, we will acknowledge you as soon as possible. Obviously, here in person, we will ask you to simply come to the podium, announce who you are with and who you are representing in your name, and then you can speak. We appreciate all of you attending. Like I said, we appreciate Commissioner Bobby Janeka and some of his staff being here from TCEQ. Several others of you, we see you regularly, so we appreciate you showing up again. Online, we see several of you as well that we appreciate your attendance. We will probably acknowledge several of you as we go through today. So thank you all for attending. Oh, and we have some of our elected officials from Andrews counties with us today online. We appreciate you being with us. We always appreciate your input and appreciate getting to be there. And I also see Commissioner Saudick has joined us online, and I see Commissioner Edwards, who had a birthday yesterday. I see, oh, I'm sorry. And we also have with us, we're very excited today to have our new Attorney General Representative Rosalind with us. We appreciate her attendance. She has already helped us drastically, so we appreciate her being here and all the support she provides us. The Vice Chairman's here, Commissioner Mundy, myself, and Commissioner Morris, and as I said, our birthday lady. So we have a quorum with Commissioner Saudick also being online, so we can proceed with our business. We've announced everyone that I think is an elected official, but do we have anyone here today from the press? I did not think we did, but I wanted to check. We are now through the first three items on our agenda, so we're to item 4, which is the public comment section. Again, I would ask that if you want to speak, if you're online, please use the raise your hand function. If you're here in person, if you would just come forward to the lectern and announce who you are. The first person that I see have their hand raised is Karen Haddon. So we will bring her into the Zoom and ask her to unmute her mic, and we will turn it over to Ms. Haddon. Good morning, Karen.
Good morning. Hope you are all doing well, and here's wishing you all a happy holiday season. And today I wanted to talk to you briefly about the fact that greater than Class C is being looked at by the NRC for reclassification. I'm hoping that you as a body will consider this as well, whether officially or unofficially, in that it impacts the waste that could come for disposal at WCS. And it seems like increasingly hot concentrations are risky. They're not the same thing as was originally licensed and disposed. And it's unclear whether this waste could actually include the fuel rods, because reactor than Class C has a range. And the fuel rods themselves, that was originally part of what the Texas legislature voted against having go to WCS, what the governor spoke out about, what the courts have ruled in New Orleans that should not come to the site. So I'm really concerned that this may be a back end run around existing policy, sentiment, and law, and would allow for disposal of waste that should actually be going for deep geologic disposal, as the NRC used to recommend. So I'm hoping that you as a body will consider this, weigh in on it, even as individuals, if you can't do it as an organization, but to say, no, we need to protect public health and safety and draw the line where it was originally drawn for safety reasons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Haddon. I'll also note for the record that Commissioner Bradford has joined us, and because she can't get enough of us, Melissa's back with us one more time. So we appreciate her joining us online as well. Anyone else that would like to make a public comment? I see a hand from a familiar face, Commissioner Janeka.
Is this mic on? Is this where the
It should pick.
members of the public should be speaking from?
Yes.
Bobby Janeka, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. I just wanted to offer a brief additional bit of information in response to the comment you just heard. I think that's accurate to say that the NRC is looking at greater than Class C in conjunction with the Part 61 low-level waste rules that they have been working on for decades. And the soonest that they have posted and shared with the public that they expect to finalize, if their schedule holds, which I think we all understand and respect how much those schedules are subject to change, November 2025 was the date that I noted at the last advisory panel meeting that they had received comments from staff, technical staff on. So I wanted to make sure the commission was aware of what the timeline looked like, and that would start the soonest that the state of Texas would need to then consider where our current rule prohibition against the acceptance for disposal of greater than Class C or the license restrictions limitations, which would have to come after a rulemaking, which many of those who are familiar with our agency knows it takes about a year and change to get a rule change. So I appreciate the immediacy of the issue for those who are concerned about it, but in terms of fitting into a regulatory landscape, I can assure you it's not a burning, about to fall issue.
Before you leave, let me just say something. We're lucky to have Bobby Janeka. He is always a fountain of knowledge. I think he maybe is the most knowledgeable person on this issue in our state and maybe all the states. I don't know. But I just, not to try to embarrass you, but I just want to tell you thank you for all you do for us. You always keep us updated. You always keep us informed. And we would, in a lot of ways, be lost in the woods without you, some of your guidance. So we appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Monica Perales has her hand raised, so we'll bring her now into the discussion.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning.
Hi. Yes, my name is Monica Perales. I'm an attorney for Fasken Oil and Ranch and for the Permian Basin Coalition. I'd like to piggyback on what Bobby Janeka said. And I understand that he doesn't feel that there is a sense of urgency. Maybe it'll be 2025 before that rule takes effect, but the federal government is already seeking public comment. There is a meeting in January and they are seeking public comment. That's part of the process. And the NRC has pushed back and they have said that when the state of Texas and others don't participate, they don't have standing later on were there to be some sort of legal action. And therefore it is urgent and it is a matter of urgency that the state of Texas participate and submit public comment and get involved in order to ensure that they have standing should they choose to challenge any rule change at the federal level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perales. We appreciate that. Anyone else have any public comment? Dave Carlson's got his hand up. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, commissioners. My name is David Carlson. I work for Waste Control Specialists. I'm an engineer and I'm the president there. I'd like to talk a little bit about greater than Class C low-level radioactive waste and the safety of our low-level radioactive waste disposal operations. First, you've heard today that high-level waste, spent nuclear fuel could be low-level waste, that there's some redoing of the definition of greater than Class C waste or of low-level radioactive waste to make that the case. That is absolutely not true. You could call the NRC, you can look at the documents. There is no reclassification of spent nuclear fuel or high-level waste even being considered in the rulemaking that's going on today. So what is greater than Class C waste? Well, greater than Class C waste, you can read in DOE documents, NRC documents, what's included in that. I'll give a few examples. Probably the one we hear the most about is reactor-related GTCC. Now that the word reactor-related GTCC just comes from a part of the NRC regulations that discusses storage of spent nuclear fuel. Because there's no place to put greater than Class C waste today, GTCC happens to be stored alongside spent nuclear fuel at nuclear power plants, but it's in no way the same. So that material is actually irradiated metals that comes from the internals of nuclear reactors. We take right now Class A, B, and C irradiated metals from the internals of nuclear reactors. Greater than Class C, the only difference is a difference in concentration. And let me talk about that a little bit. It's important that people understand fully 10 CFR 61.55, which is waste classification. That's where all this is defined. And if you look in 10 CFR 61.55, and I believe it's table 2 that talks about short-lived radionuclides, those are the drivers of what waste class most things out of a nuclear power plant would be, whether it's A, B, C, or GTCC. The driver in most cases for waste coming out of the internals of a nuclear power plant is an isotope. It's called nickel-63. Nickel-63 has a 100-year half-life, and it's embedded in these metals that come out of the internals of nuclear power plants. It is not dispersible. It's embedded into those metals. Nickel-63, what is the hazard from it? Well, it's a weak beta emitter. And what does that mean? Well, a weak beta emitter in this case puts off a beta particle, very similar to an electron, that can travel about 2 inches. They say 5 centimeters, I believe, in the studies, which is about 2 inches in the air. So that's the distance that this particle can travel. So what does that mean? Well, when we take materials into our facility from the internals of reactors, they're packaged in steel packages and they go 100 feet or so underground into a modular concrete container. So there's no access to them. Well, what about hundreds of years from now? Well, we have a facility that's designed for a compliance period of 10,000 years. So what does that mean? That means the nickel-63 would be gone. So even this item that has a 2-inch travel in air emits a weak beta would be gone in any reasonable time frame. So that's what we're talking about from reactors. Let me take another instance. Another instance is sources that are used in oil and gas. So the sources that are typical that we talk about that could be GTCC at the end of their life in oil and gas would be americium beryllium sources and would be cesium-137 sources. So these are sources that are in the back of wireline trucks today. I have every confidence that the folks in oil and gas use them appropriately and carefully and avoid exposure to individuals and avoid situations that could somehow be dangerous for those sources. What I would reject is the implication that once that goes from the back of a wireline truck to my site, that it's no longer safe. It's the same thing. What we do is we package it and we dispose of it. Now, we don't dispose of GTCC, but we dispose of cesium and americium beryllium sources that would be less than GTCC levels today. So again, I reject an argument that there is some special difference or some special danger about these materials. We do currently store GTCC under our TCAQ radioactive materials license, and we've done so for a couple of decades. Over the past month or so, we've heard a lot of appallingly inaccurate misinformation relative to GTCC. We hear that a GTCC low-level radioactive waste event, whatever that might be, will contaminate the Permian Basin, perhaps up to a 50-mile perimeter. We hear that a GTCC low-level radioactive waste event could somehow render oil production or ranching impossible for years to come. These things are simply not true. There is not a scenario where that can take effect. We hear GTCC characterized as deadly. Now, it's never characterized as deadly when it's sitting in the back of a wireline truck, but it's characterized as deadly if it would come to our site. However, there's no deaths or injuries that anyone can point to during transportation, storage, or disposal of radioactive waste in Andrew, in Texas, in the in the US. So this is basically made up. Let's take a look at transportation. GTCC low-level radioactive waste is packaged for transportation in extremely robust NRC licensed containers. Packaging is tested and evaluated for all credible and incredible threats. The packaging protects the public and the environment in every instance. The track record of these packages is 100%. No release from NRC licensed packages, and we've been doing this for about 70 years. Let's look at disposal safety. There's no reasonable possibility of radiation outside of our licensed areas on the site. There's no chance of groundwater contamination because we've talked about it before in public meetings and demonstrated it through experts. There is no groundwater underneath our site that would be accessible to the waste or ultimately to the public. The shallowest grounder we have is the Trujillo Formation, and that's about 600 or 700 feet below the site. So there is no chance of groundwater contamination. In fact, the landfill across the street from us in New Mexico, they got a waiver from groundwater monitoring at the landfill across the street because they found no groundwater at the site that could possibly be impacted. Similarly, there's no chance of airborne contamination. You think about this GTCC, whether it's sources or whether it's reactor internals or other things coming into the site. Solid metal pieces, it's packaged in solid metal containers, and then it's disposed in concrete containers, and it's buried underground. There simply is no chance for dispersal of this. So you look at the exceptional track record, no incident, anything like what's been described has ever happened in 70 years in nuclear technology. We've got solid materials buried 100 feet underground. We've got materials that decay away in years to decades, and then they're gone forever. This is not something, particularly in the case of GTCC, where this is going to be around past the life of our facility. And we evaluate our facility's performance out to 1 million years. We have stable geology. It's been stable in West Texas for a very long time. I've said in front of commissions that we have extremely stable geology. I've said there's no quaternary fault within 100 miles of the site. Why is that important? Well, quaternary faulting is faults that have happened in the last 1.5 million years or so. And quaternary faulting is an indicator of future geologic or seismic instability. Now, we do have seismic activity out there, but it's all minor. Quaternary faulting would be the thing that would indicate any kind of problem on the. So most of us believe that these highly radioactive sources are safe in the oil field and in hospitals. We also have cesium-137 blood irradiators in hospitals. They are even safer when they're permanently disposed in a highly engineered disposal facility. With that, I'd be glad to take any questions about GTC.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Carlson about this issue?
What type of waste would you see coming out of these nuclear power plants that would fall into greater than C?
Right. So when a nuclear power plant is decommissioned, they have to do something with the reactor. Now they take out the spent nuclear fuel and they put it in dry storage casks and they store that on the site. So that's not something we're talking about. The rest of what's in a nuclear power plant, both in the reactor itself and the piping and demolition debris and those kind of things, have to go to disposal somewhere so the site can be reused.
So I'm trying to find out what, we deal with a lot of stuff that's falling into, within the current classification and approved for disposal.
Right.
So what's in that gap between what is sitting in storage right now that we're not dealing with? What kind of things are they that come out of power plants that need this type of rulemaking?
It would be internal support structures in reactor vessels.
Okay.
So it's the structural metal members that kind of hold things in place. So it would hold, the spent fuel in place as it's in the reactor. It could be things like things that could come to us already. We already receive fuel channels. We receive control rod blades. We receive, power detectors and those kind of things from inside the core that have to be replaced and disposed during the life.
Yeah.
These are things that are structural, that at the end of life, there's a place for it, or needs to be a place for it. So it's really no different in terms of radionuclides from what we take in today. It's a difference in concentration level.
And so the next part, follow up to that is what is just, and not holding it to this, just ballparking, what are we talking about volume and Curie wise? Would you forecast like either per year, or if you need longer range, what would come at us that we have to factor in for volumes and Curies?
Right. So if we, well, first off, none of this would be disposed into the compact waste facility.
Mhm.
So it wouldn't count against totals for the compact waste facility. GTCC, because when the regulations were written back in 1982, because there were no facilities that could take GTCC, it's a federal responsibility. Now, that doesn't mean that the federal government can tell Texas what to do relative to that. It's still low-level radioactive waste, so the regulations are still the responsibility of TCEQ. The implication that somehow the federal government could say, this is what you have to do, Texas, and that Texas just has to do that is incorrect. And I could, certainly go into depth as to how that works.
I'm just asking for planning purposes. So you would not see any greater than C going into the compact cell?
No.
So going to open up the federal cell and all of it would be disposed over there?
So I would say, Commissioner, we're not even at that point.
Well,
This is an issue that's been brought up by others at this point. The steps that would have to happen for something like that to occur at some point in the future is there would have to be Texas regulation. There would have to be Texas license changes. This is not, although the NRC develops policy and guidelines that can flow down to the states, it's up to Texas to decide what's going
but
to.
I'm asking, if you got the magic wand and got all your wishes and you can have greater than C for disposal, got all the green lights you need, where would it physically go?
If we were to pursue that, and if that were to be accepted by the state of Texas, it would go into the federal waste facility.
Okay. That's what I was getting at. Thank you.
And it's also reasonably low volumes because it's in the order of hundreds or thousands of sources that would fit into this category. And here I'm talking about hospital blood irradiators. I'm talking about downhole neutron and gamma logging
Well,
sources.
by volume, I know our experience here is by overwhelming volume, physical volume, it's coming out of the power plants realistically. And I would assume that would hold true for this also, roughly.
Yeah, I look at decommissioned power plants and trying to think through it, you'd see 2 or 3 cans of GTCC at a typical decommissioned nuclear power plant. Is that about right, Commissioner?
Yeah.
Yeah, in that range, and that's 400 cubic feet is a typical can for putting this stuff at a nuclear power plant. And what they do is they cut it up and load it into a can that's similar to a spent fuel can. They weld the top of it and put it on a storage pad for a long time. But yeah, typically 2 or 3 of those cans, some as low as 1 and some more, but that's typically what we'd see.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlson? Thank you, Mr. Carlson.
Thank you.
Sure.
Turn your mic.
So a couple of things sort of stood out to me from the earlier discussion, including Dave's comments. And one that jumps out most was the sort of conflation of greater than class C and high level waste. They are 2 separate categories. By definition, low level waste, we usually think about class A, B, and C, but greater than class C is a part of low level waste. And high level waste related to fuel specifically is not low level waste. And so just from earlier comments, it seemed like there might be some confusion that high level waste or fuel itself could be greater than class C. It cannot by definition. And the one thing I'd add about greater than class C from nuclear power plants is a great deal of effort goes into managing waste streams at a nuclear power plant to preclude the generation of greater than class C waste in resins or filters. I don't really know of any resins that have gone to greater than Class C in my personal knowledge, but occasionally a filter can be greater than Class C. And typically that's managed in a way to either decay it away or encapsulate it or sort of cut it up and embed it in cement to render it not Class C. It would be class or not greater than Class C. It'd be Class A, B, or C. But that is one other stream that could be generated in a nuclear power plant. It usually isn't.
I mean, just my guess, and this is pure guesswork, is that with money becoming available to refurbish some of these plants that had been slated for decommissioning, some of them will have pretty serious workovers. You think what's that waste stream going to look like if they're reworking some of these to extend their life?
So I'm not an expert on what would be taken, what actions would need to be taken, but off the top of my head, a lot of these components that you're talking about are integral to the reactor. And that's beyond a license extension. The cost benefit of pulling out the reactor core and the internals around it would be, it wouldn't work. It'd be probably easier to build a new nuclear power plant. Now, I'm saying that just the top of my head. I'm not an expert on that, so. But it doesn't seem like a reasonable
Not a bunch. Okay.
generator of waste.
Okay.
Mhm,
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards.
mhm.
But before we go back to Ms. Adden, I want to make sure everybody else gets their chance on this first round. Is there any other people here in person that would like to make a public comment? Okay, then we can go to Ms. Adden. Ms. Adden,
Hi, I just wanted to clarify because I think I might have been unclear in my comments earlier. I was referring to reactor-related greater than Class C. And the connection to spent nuclear fuel is that those two things, which are in fact different, as you said, but those two things are what was part of the consolidated interim storage license, which the Texas legislature opposed. The governor has spoken out against it, and the Fifth Circuit Court has ruled against. So what I'm saying is that the reactor-related greater than Class C is supposed to go to deep geologic repositories. And that has not happened and needs to happen. And to dispose of it at the federal site could impose additional concentrations that were not originally set out for shallow burial at WCS. Thank you.
thank you, Ms. Adden. We appreciate that. Would anyone else like to make a comment? Mr. Carlson?
Hi, David Carlson, President of WCS. Let me speak to that specifically. So the best place to go would be 10 CFR 61.55, section 824. And section 824 says, and I'll read it here so that we can all understand what the words are. Waste that is generally not acceptable for near surface disposal is waste for which form and disposal methods must be different, and in general more stringent than those specified for Class C waste. In the absence of specific requirements in this part, such waste must be disposed of in a geologic repository as defined in Part 60 or 63 of this chapter, unless proposals for disposal of such waste in a disposal site license pursuant to this part are approved by the Commission. So there's not a black and white thing here that says it has to go to a deep geologic repository. I'm aware of low-level radioactive waste facilities in the country that have already taken GTCC into them based on specific approvals that were based on specific performance evaluations of those sites. So that has happened on a case-by-case basis. Let me reiterate that what's in 10 CFR 61 was written in 1982. It was based on the performance and the design of low-level radioactive waste facilities that were in place in the 1970s. These were facilities where, when they were originally built, the expectation of even surviving 100 or 500 years was not always there. These are facilities that were designed for disposal of cobalt-60, where in 50 to 100 years, it's basically all gone. What the NRC is doing today is they're updating regulations from 1982 based on science that has improved since that point and based on disposal facilities that are many times more robust than anything that existed in the 1970s. So please take a look. 6155A24 is where disposal of GTCC is specifically addressed, and it's not addressed as a black and white thing, as some folks would perhaps describe it. Thank you.
Which facilities are currently or in the past have accepted greater than C?
So there's several low-level radioactive waste disposal facilities that are historical, that have extended back to the 1970s.
Mhm.
I don't have the records of those facilities, but what I do have is knowledge from discussion of those facilities that there's been times when they've had to look backwards and then go to the NRC and say, well, there's things that are GTCC or potentially GTCC that were disposed in these facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Commissioner Sonic, you had your hand up?
Yeah. I'm wondering how this fits into our overall mission. It seems to me that we were established in order to take care of low-level waste disposal. And it's always made me more comfortable with the fact that we have this facility and that we regulate it and that we allow low-level waste in there and we deliberate on it. But it seemed to me, it seems to me that it may be in the public interest that we consider taking this GTCC. I don't consider myself technically competent enough to really make that judgment, but it seems to be kind of part of our general mission to dispose of waste that is not generally considered high-level waste, not spent fuel, and so on. We've got the best facility by far going, and we might want to look a little bit more into this to try to figure our way through it. As far as the Texas legislature, the Texas governor, or the Texas whoever, attorney general, whatever, that I must say personally doesn't really move me. But I think it may be part of the whole scheme. I'm also somewhat interested in how TCEQ views this problem and how TCEQ would react to the acceptance of this line of waste. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sodick. To be clear, from the commission's perspective, one of the best statements I can make about this is that it will not be up to us what happens. And that's lets me sleep a little bit better at night. This will be something that obviously is done both at the NRC level and potentially at the state level, including TCQ and others. But we will obviously closely monitor this, but we will not have an active role because it does, I think, at this point, fall outside our jurisdiction. That's not to say that our jurisdiction couldn't be changed at some point or that it couldn't have some sort of implication where we're asked to opine or maybe even provide some assistance, which we would, of course, do. But at this point, this does not fall within the definition of what has been granted to us as far as jurisdictional rights on what we regulate. So while we're interested, I don't know that we will have any kind of active role in making any kind of decision going forward. The NRC is having the virtual meeting, I believe, on January 23rd that will obviously address some of these issues, and I believe it's both for public comment and possibly some education. But we appreciate everybody educating us on it because we do want to be stay abreast of the issue and be prepared to act if asked to. So we do appreciate all of the education. We do appreciate everyone providing us their opinion. Obviously, if you feel you want to educate us further, please feel free to do so. You can always email Stephen if any information you want the commission to receive, he can distribute it. If you simply want to have a forum to make a presentation to us, I think we will always allow that from, as I've said, as long as you're respectful and appropriate with your presentation. I think we enjoy the idea and appreciate the idea of being educated on these issues. So I appreciate everybody's comments. But with that, let me ask, are there any other, I'm sorry, Ms. Perales has her hand up again. So I will call on her again.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate it. I'll be quick. Regarding the decision as to whether or not Texas would allow GTCC and transuranic and GTCC like waste into the state. Similarly to the argument before the Fifth Circuit, the governor agrees that this is a matter for the Texas legislature and not for an agency. It is of such consequence that it is not for the TCQ to decide. It is for the Texas legislature to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perales. That's an important point to make. Thank you. So are there any other public comments before we move on to the remainder of our agenda? Any other comments from commissioners? Hearing none, we can move on to item 5 on our agenda, which is our report from WCS. So we'll call Mr. Carlson back to the mic.
Carlson, do you want to let me just share the screen of what you sent, your slide deck with the public as well? What would you like to do with that?
Yeah, if you can share it with the public, that's great. I don't know if it's great.
Share right now. Give me just 1 second.
And while he's doing that, commissioners, this is the stapled item that's called CWF capacity that was given to you by Mr. Carlson before our meeting began.
Great, thank you. So let me start with current Texas fiscal year to date, starting September through the end of November. In compact disposals have been 667 cubic feet and 370 curies. Out of compact disposal have been 7,015 cubic feet and 68,224 curies. What I'd like to do, and hopefully everybody can see the slide, is talk a little bit about the compact waste facility and where we stand on that in terms of capacity and constructed capacity and so on. Excuse me a second as I pull that up. So you see on the right-hand side a picture of where we stand today. In the bottom part of the picture is the new facility, and commissioners, I know a lot of you stood in the bottom of that facility during construction, and so you're well aware of it. That's completed today. So the phase 1 constructed capacity was 450,000 cubic feet of waste. The remaining capacity there is about 30% as of the end of November. So that 134,631 cubic feet. The new phase design capacity is 425,000 cubic feet. Construction is completed as of today. We're going through and preparing the final reports we submit to TCEQ. TCEQ has been very kind to be involved throughout the process. So they've been reviewing our documents as we produce them, as well as they'll review our final report there. I have a date here of 12/22/2023 for us submitting that final certification report. It'll be before the end of the year. We're still waiting on some survey data because you need precise surveys when you're completed, and we don't have that from the surveyors yet. So it could be a few days after that. The phase 2A in-service date really depends on how long it takes for TCQ's review. They do a thorough review of this material. We're just estimating 2 months, but there's no commitment or anything holding to TCQ to that particular period. We'll just work with them to help them get through the review and provide them any additional information as quickly as we can. In terms of projected capacity, when that's in service, it'll be more than the initial capacity of the facility. It'll be 550,000 cubic feet. Looking at disposal rates, even over the last few years, that's about 15 years of disposal capacity we should have online in the first quarter next year. So hopefully that makes all of our Texas utilities feel very comfortable and Texas generators feel very comfortable that there will be plenty of space for them going forward. Let's see, moving beyond that, total disposed since inception through November 30 is 315,000 cubic feet, or about 3.5% of licensed capacity. 632,000 curies decayed, so about 16% of licensed capacity. In terms of payments in quarter four, for the period of June through August, we paid $731,684 to TCEQ, $75,902 to Andrews County in surcharges, and the total since inception are about $77 million to TCEQ, about $17.4 million to Andrews County, or a grand total of about $95 million paid in surcharges on the operation of the facility. The next thing I'd like to talk about, and I can't really tell which slide is up, but we have an amendment into TCEQ right now, and just wanted to let people know what that is. We submit amendments, TCEQ reviews them for administrative completeness and asks us for additional information. If they don't feel they're administratively complete, they look at them for technical completeness and ask for additional information if they don't believe they're technically complete. And we go through a process to provide all that information to them. And we are through that process at this point. We submitted on June 20th, 2023, and there's really 5 major things that are in that amendment. The first one is, as everybody knows, there's been Los Alamos transuranic waste stored at our facility for a long time. And WCS, as well as TCEQ, have been very interested in how soon can we move that off the site. It has what's called the D001 RCRA code and ignitability code that has prevented us from moving that waste because there's no transportation package, because WIP can't accept it in that condition. DOE has been working diligently to find a way to make this happen. What's happened on our site is we've constructed an above ground facility so that we can remove this waste from inside the MCCs that it's in today. So the current configuration is a modular concrete container down in the bottom of our federal waste facility with standard waste boxes in it. A standard waste box is a metal box that has 4 55-gallon drums in it. So you would have 4 55-gallon drums inside a standard waste box. We backfill on top of it with gravel that's in a modular concrete container that's about a foot thick or so on the walls of the container. We'll take those above ground and we will unpack them in this Permacon facility. A Permacon facility is the same kind of facility they would use at Los Alamos to handle this kind of waste. And what that means is any conceivable or inconceivable event with this material, there's HEPA filtration on the building. And so there couldn't be a release. Any materials that were somehow released would be captured on the HEPA filters. But what's the purpose of moving this above ground? The purpose is to allow DOE to examine it, ultimately to package it in a way that they feel they can dispose of it at WIP and put it on the road and get it out of the state. We expect that that should be done by 2026 based on approval of this amendment and allowing that to come to this above ground facility. Next item out of the 5, the compact waste facility financial assurance increase. So our financial assurances are increasing based on the construction of the phase 2A disposal cell. This is one reason why we don't construct the whole site at once, because we'd have to put financial assurance in place for the entire site all at once. That financial assurance is largely to fill the hole back in and to put the closure cap on that. So the total change in our financial assurance is about $27.7 million of increase in financial assurance that is included in this amendment. Our radiological environmental monitoring program is being changed to incorporate additional monitoring wells as we've installed phase 2A. That means we've had to put in additional wells in order to surround that area. And that includes those here. We have a stabilization building on site that's used for treatment of radioactive waste. And this upgrades the fireproofing of that stabilization building to meet a 1-hour fire rating, which is required pending the type of waste that we treat in that facility. And finally, radioactive or radiological impact analysis. So we've modified a radiological impact analysis to include one additional isotope that's lead-202. It's a obscure isotope that we just simply don't see very often. No significant difference in from isotopes we normally see, but it wasn't evaluated, and so we needed to include it in our evaluation because there's potentially some waste with lead-202 to be disposed. So those are the changes. Certainly, TCQ has this in their hands, and they could respond to any questions about the details of this or the process they go through in order to do that. So any questions on Amendment 40?
Any questions for Mr. Carlson on this? What is the status of the license renewal?
Yeah, so that's a much longer process. So those documents have been submitted. I believe we're still dealing with some administrative information that we need to add to that. And so, as TCEQ does their initial review for administrative completeness, they will identify things where they want more information or where they felt we should provide more information, and we'll do that. And then they'll go into a technical review. There is no time frame on this, but certainly it's enough documents that it could take years for TCQ to go through it.
And during that period, I forget the term, but you have the right to operate under your current license until a decision is made.
We do. We're in a timely renewal status based on submitting our renewal application in the time frame that's required by the regulations.
Okay.
Will you fill out the existing cell 100% before you start moving material into the expanded cell? Or
No,
is
we
there a
won't.
little bit of overlap and transition between the two?
Yeah, there's some overlap. We've really used up most of the floor space in the existing cell, and there's certain packages that make more sense,
Mhm.
on the floor. They're easier to place. So a lot of it's designed around, okay, how do we use our heavy equipment in the optimal way to place these items in the cell? So when it's approved, and, as I said, it could be March, it could be later.
Yeah.
When it's approved, we will begin making some use of that facility, probably within weeks or months after it's approved.
And then will you go ahead, when you reach capacity on the existing cell, will you go ahead and close it?
So in terms of putting a full cap on at that point, we'll have to evaluate. There's certainly, the proximity of those things is very close together. The haul roads to get down are the same. And so at that point, it may not be possible to, put the cap on. Ultimately, as we continue to move with the facility, that's fully the intent. If you look at a RECRA facility, as we close phases of the RECRA facility, we apply the cap to it. So generally, that's the concept. Specifically, we'll have to see how that goes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we let Mr. Carlson move on to his next topic? Okay, I think we can move on.
Well, I did want to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about low-level radioactive waste. I know we talk about it a lot. Some folks that might be listening online perhaps hear the words, and radioactivity, I suppose, is almost a bad word to some folks and a little bit scary. But I'd like to describe what it is. So I've got a few slides that just kind of lead into what is low-level radioactive waste. So to start, I really have to talk about what is radiation. Well, radioactivity is the process where an unstable atom, a radioactive atom, becomes stable through radioactive decay. So a radioactive atom, and these exist in nature as well as produced by man. These radioactive atoms ultimately decay to something that is not radioactive over time. So the types of particles that are emitted from the nucleus of an atom in order to move it to a stable condition fall into four categories. Alpha particles, and alpha particles are basically like a helium atom. They're easy to stop, a few centimeters of air, a sheet of paper, that sort of thing. We have beta particles, which are slightly more penetrating, but it depends on the energy level. So there's a lot of nuance to even what I'm talking about here. I could talk about alpha particles for an hour easily. A physicist could talk about alpha particles for many, many, many hours to go into detail. So I'm just giving you a very high level overview of these things. Gamma rays are more penetrating. They require shielding to stop. Typically that'd be steel or lead to stop gamma rays. Very similar to X-rays, slightly different energy spectrum than X-rays, but they're both ionizing radiation. And then finally, we have neutrons. Neutrons are produced in reactors or by special radioactive sources. That's not something we would typically see on the WCS site, or that we would see on the WCS site. They would be at nuclear reactors and other nuclear facilities. When we talk about radioactive decay, that's the process by which one of these unstable atoms emits radiation and changes into a different atom, a different isotope. It can actually turn into a different element, or it can be the same element, but a different isotope, depending on what particles are ejected from the nucleus of the atom in terms of the radioactive decay. Now, we measure radioactivity in Curies. And remember, this is all subatomic things that are going on. So a Curie is a unit of radioactivity, and it corresponds to 3.7 times 10 to the 10th disintegrations per second. Those are, again, these are atomic disintegrations that are taking place. This is not something you'll physically see. This is something you detect with some sort of an instrument or meter. So moving on to the next slide, we talk a lot about radioactive half-life. Radioactive half-life is the time that it takes for 1/2 of the radioactive atoms to decay. So our most common isotope at our facility, at our compact waste facility, is cobalt-60. Cobalt-60 has a 5.3-year half-life, and you can look down the right-hand side there, and you can see, after each half-life or after each number of years, how much of that cobalt-60 still remains. And what you'll see is after 10 half-lives, you're down to 1/10 of 1%. If you go through 100 years or just about 20 half-lives, you're 2/millionths of the original radioactivity. And one way to look at that is, on the bottom left-hand side, we compare radioactive cobalt-60 in low-level radioactive waste with non-radioactive but toxic arsenic, for example, in a gallium arsenide solar cell. So what happens with radioactive decay, and we just show it pictorially here, is that over time, that radioactive cobalt-60 is going away, and eventually it is all gone. When you take something that's hazardous, again, we have hazardous waste facilities all around the state, something that's hazardous, it does not decay away. So it remains into perpetuity because it's not radioactive and it doesn't go through radioactive decay. There is no way to make the arsenic, for example, go away.
I have a silly, non-technical person question. Why is it measured in half-lives and not full lives?
That's a good.
That's a physics question. That's
It's
good.
a half, when the half-life is when it's half of what it was.
I understand that, but why is that the measure? Why don't we just say cobalt-60 will decay in X number of years to 0? Why do we always measure it in half-lives?
Because
Right,
it
because what
depends on your
happens-
starting amount, right? I mean, if you have a starting amount, usually it's after 5 half-lives, it's basically 0. But if you have a high enough amount of activity, it can be more than 5 half-lives. And it never is technically 0. It's half of what it was at the beginning of that
Okay,
time frame.
It's an
Right, so
exponential
Chairman,
decrease.
okay.
John wanted to weigh in.
It goes to infinity.
The other reason is because of the length of those half-lives. It would be, for example, uranium, the half-life, they said 1 billion years, so for half of it to go away, so to say when it would all be gone would be, I forget, comes after billion.
It's
but a whole lot.
just- Yeah.
Okay,
It would be
Be
too
practical.
unwieldy to try to think of it. that way.
okay,
but it asymptotically approaches 0.
right.
That's the point. So it's continually half, and so it asymptotically approaches 0 ultimately.
And then it runs out to infinity
You know,
because it never technically.
Because that last atom,
Never quite goes away.
correct. But it's reduced to what I would call
Infinitesimal.
environmental level. So
Yeah.
you take a look at it, things that last the longest tend to be things that are already in the environment, whether it's uranium, iridium, or thorium, and so on, and their daughter products. And those will be with us forever. They're here now and they'll be here forever. So on the next slide, radiation dose and dose rate. And again, I'm just building up to, what is low-level radioactive waste here. So radiation dose is the amount of radiation exposure that you receive, and we typically measure that in the US at least in milliround. So that's simply a radiation dose unit. A dose rate is how fast you're actually receiving that radiation, and we typically measure that again in this country in milliram per hour. So that's a radiation dose rate. Now there's limits, regulatory limits on how much dose you can get in a year. So on the right-hand side at the top there are regulatory dose limits for licensed activities. That's a site like mine. My workers are allowed up to 5,000 millirem per year. That's what's determined to be safe by the federal government, by the state of Texas government, and so on. And for a member of the public coming on my site, they would be allowed 100 millirem per year. However, folks that come to my site don't get dose other than what they're getting from the environment anyway. So those are regulatory limits and give you a sense of how much people would be allowed to get in a year that's determined to be a safe level. Now, to go right below that, a typical medical exposure, you take a look at a chest x-ray. We're very good at those nowadays, very low dose from those, about 10 millirem is what you get from a chest x-ray. On the other hand, a CT scan, those are fairly high doses of ionizing radiation. I would never tell anyone not to get a CT scan because it's the most wonderful innovation in terms of supporting doctors that we could have. And again, this is a reasonable amount of dose. It's less than the dose available to a radiation worker, but it's about 2,000 millirem for a CT scan. I do want to look at natural background, and that's on the bottom on the left-hand side. And it talks about our sources of natural background radiation that everybody gets. And the biggest one tends to be inhaled radon. Radon is ultimately a daughter of uranium and follows in the uranium decay chain. And the concern would be the radon daughters that could be ingested into your body. Everybody's getting that, averages out to about 230 millirem per year for a member of the public. Cosmic is radiation that comes from space, not specifically the sun, but stellar bodies giving off particles that interact with the atmosphere and cause cosmic radiation, and we all get that. Obviously, if you're in a mine underground, you would get less of that. Internal emitters, these are things in our own bodies that are giving off radiation. Terrestrial, that's soil. That's okay if you're walking on the ground and you've got that uranium and radium and so on. That's what those are. And I've also broken down the man-made background that we would get from other sources. So the average person in the United States gets about 620 millirem per year. At least that's the evaluation that's done by a technical group, the NCRP, that has put this information out. Just because of things like cosmic radiation, it's interesting that an airline crew member, due to cosmic radiation, due to being higher in altitude and being up there a lot, they would get perhaps 300 millirem per year from their job flying in an airplane. My average worker gets about 70 millirem per year from what they're doing in my site. So the next slide talks about what is radioactive waste. The EPA says that radioactive waste is waste that's generated as a byproduct from producing or using radioactive materials. The industries would be mining, nuclear power generation, defense, medicine, research, and so on. Now, all radioactive waste gives off radiation, but it's not all low-level radioactive waste. We have other kinds of radioactive waste as well, either based on the source or based on the type of materials involved. So the TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, says that low-level radioactive waste is defined by what it is not. And low-level radioactive waste does not include high-level waste, such as spent nuclear fuel. That's specifically by definition in Texas regulations, in NRC regulations, and so on. Does not include transuranic waste produced by the U.S. Nuclear Weapons Program, does not include uranium mill tailings or other mining byproducts, and does not include naturally occurring radioactive material or norm waste. Now, a couple of these categories we can take at our site. We take norm waste, and we have a byproduct facility where we can take byproduct materials as well. But that doesn't make them low-level radioactive waste. Now, people sometimes think in terms of a continuum from low-level radioactive waste to high-level waste. That's simply not the case. As Commissioner Edwards said, they're distinctly different things. So you can't have a higher level of low-level waste that suddenly becomes high-level waste. That's simply not the way that the definitions work. And that's simply not the way that either the NRC or Texas regulators designed it to be. So on my final slide, and I apologize for speaking for so long, but I think it's important for people to see this. I'll talk about the characteristics and classification of low-level radioactive waste. Now there's tables, and I mentioned 10 CFR 6155. That's waste classification in NRC regulations that talks about what is Class A, Class B, Class C, and greater than Class C waste. Now those tables are concentration-based, but what's in them is based on three things in the background. Of course, radioactive concentration, but also the type of radiation and also the radionuclide half-life. So again, when the tables were built, the consideration was made back in 1982 that future facilities would be very similar to past facilities. They would be like the facilities that existed in the 1970s. And so the tables for classification of low-level radioactive waste were based on that information that was available at that point in time. Now, to give folks a sense of what is the low-level radioactive waste that we take into our facility, that's the first table there. So 99% of what we take into the compact waste facility is represented by these 5 radionuclides. So the first one, and I mentioned it before, about 45% or 43% of what we take in is cobalt-60, which has a 5.3-year half-life. So effectively, if you look at the table that I showed you previously, this is something that goes away and goes away fairly quickly. Next on the list would be iron-55, shorter half-life, 2.7 years. So it goes away even more quickly than cobalt-60 goes away. Next on the list, and this is one you will see specifically called out in 10 CFR 61.55, is nickel-63. Well, why is that important? Well, because as people were evaluating this based on facilities from the 1970s, they looked at a 100-year half-life and said, well, that could be problematic. A 100-year half-life, I have a facility that perhaps is only designed for 500 years or so. What's going to happen after that period of time? So that was included in the table. Now that's a weak beta emitter, as I mentioned, and that weak beta emitter can travel perhaps 2 inches in the air. It's stopped by your skin if you somehow were able to be directly exposed to it. But the nickel-63, we would take in that solid metal objects. The next one would be tritium. Tritium, again, a weak beta emitter with a 12.3-year half-life, is about 7% of what we take in. And then cesium-137 with a 30-year half-life is another gamma emitter. This can also be a class driver similar to nickel-63. Again, because it has a 30-year half-life, it was looked at differently when the tables were put together. So again, that's about 2% of the total we have in our facility. And on the column, the second column from the right-hand side, you can see what's the current inventory. And this was as of April 10th, 2022. I just didn't update this particular slide. Now, the last thing I want to cover is just there are other radionuclides that we are very much aware of in the environment and other places. And what do those look like? Well, Commissioner Salzman mentioned uranium-238. So uranium-238 has a 4.5 billion year half-life. That is natural material. That is an alpha emitter, or generally an alpha emitter. So it emits those helium type particles that are not very penetrating, but you simply wouldn't want to ingest and have them in your body. The source is nature. You know, when we pull that up out of the ground and concentrate it, it can be called norm or T-norm material. Similarly, radium-226 is something we see in the environment. Now that's in the radioactive decay chain of uranium-238, and that's about 1,600 years half-life, another alpha emitter. And we also see that in norm material in Texas, and generally comes from nature. When you're when you're pulling produced water from a well and you push it through a filter, you're going to concentrate norm materials in that filter, and then the filter has to be disposed of because it's radioactive waste at that point. It is not low-level radioactive waste. Another one that we're very familiar with is americium-241, again, because these are sources that we see in the oil field. Americium-241 has a 432-year half-life. It's an alpha emitter, and it's produced in a reactor. So that's the source of how alpha, or how americium-241 would come to be, so that we have that available to make sources. So that's my overview. I am very open to any questions about low-level radioactive waste. This is very much just a scratching at the surface. You could take any of the pages in this, and I'm sure that Commissioner Salzman, Commissioner Morris, Commissioner Edwards could opine. That's not fair, not opine, but tell us facts about it for many hours, because there is so much depth behind this, and it's important to understand, at least on the surface, and then as we dig deeper, to sometimes get into the depth of that.
Mr. Carlson, do you have any objection to us publishing this on our website?
I do not. I believe everything that's in there is based on some source other than myself.
And I do that just for the public's benefit. If anybody wants to have a copy of it or whatever, I want to make sure it's available to them. So I think we will go back and publish this, maybe not immediately, but we will get it on our website eventually, because it has a lot of important information that I think could be useful to people. So any other questions for Mr. Carlson? Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. Ms. Haddon has her hand up, so I want to make sure we call on her and let her comment. I think you need to unmute, Karen.
I'm sorry, I did not need to comment now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we've been going about an hour and 10 minutes. So before we get to the rest of our agenda, which I don't think will take too terribly long, I think we ought to take a little break, maybe 15 minutes. So it's about 11:10. If everybody could be back about 11:25, we will reconvene then. Thank you. 45 days, the comment period?
30 days.
30 days, I'm sorry, 30 days for public comment. And depending on those comments, we will respond to those comments. It can potentially lead to changes, it may not. Then after that comment period and the response period, then it goes into final adoption, and then it becomes a rule. Did I say all that right? So that is you hear people refer to the APA process. That is that process that I just described. So I think in what we're doing today is the Rules Committee is recommending the rule for publication in the Texas Register for that initial notice and comment period.
Linda needs to restate her motion because the recording wasn't on.
Okay,
Yes.
so since the recording wasn't on, I'll turn it back over to Commissioner Morris for her to restate what she's already stated.
Yes, thank you. The Rules Committee has met and has recommended that the rule as presented to the Compact Commission in the most recent packet be sent for publication in the Texas Register with subsequent comment periods.
And so since it's a recommendation from a committee, does it require a second? So it's a recommendation from a committee. Is there any discussion or questions of Chairman Morris about the rule? Okay, I'm just making, seeing none, I think then we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the recommendation of approving the recommendation of the Rules Committee to publish the proposed rule in our packet in the Texas Register. And I don't even know what the timeline is on getting it published.
Probably be early January before we get in, just
Because of the holidays, it'll be published in early January. Please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes and the rule will now be published. For those of you in the public, obviously, you will have the opportunity to comment on the rule once it's published. We do take all those comments very seriously. Quite frankly, the reason we're doing this is because of some of the comments that were made the last time we published. So it's there's proof out there that we do care about what the public says and we take them very seriously. So we look forward to any comments.
You might, because before that, talk about agenda item 6A.
Oh, I'm sorry. Because our recording was not going when we were talking about item 6A, I wanted to remind everyone that we hired an outside contractor, Michael Klebe, to provide us an impact study that is required for our preamble. That is either, I would say, close to being done, subject to a couple of minor final revisions potentially. But that will be part of our process for the publication. His report is included, a draft of the report is included in the packet. Like I said, it is subject to maybe finalization is the term I would use. But we appreciate Mr. Klebe. He did an excellent job and is really kind of an authority in our field. So we appreciate him working with us, and we appreciate his conclusions. And if anyone has any questions about any of the contents of that report, you can always ask Stephen, and Stephen can route those questions or comments to Mr. Klebe. So with that, I believe we're through with item 6, and we can move on to item 7, the capacity committee report. Not to steal the thunder of Lisa, but I will say I did a quick calculation before we got here today. Based on the waste received to date, the authorizations that we have made to date, and our need to reserve the 35,000 cubic feet capacity, I estimate that we have somewhere in the neighborhood of somewhere between 25 and 28,000 cubic feet left in the current cell. Based on what Mr. Carlson said today about the new expanded cell being ready by March, and the fact that we don't meet until February, I think that means we have absolutely no concerns and no problems. But obviously, I want to keep everybody fully apprised of where we stand on capacity. And again, to be clear, we have approximately 70,000 cubic feet authorized out there. We know with almost a veritable certainty that will not all be used. Based on historic patterns, we think anywhere from a quarter to a third of that will likely be used. But on paper, that is what our current authorizations are. Some of that is subject to our large capacity program that I think Stephen will talk about in a minute. But I wanted to update everybody on what the capacity is, and then ask Lisa if there was any other reports from the capacity committee.
No other reports?
All right, thank you very much. So with that, we can move on to item 8, which is a contingency plan report, a committee report, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Mundy. I was going to do it in my report.
Okay.
But
All right, so we have nothing to report at this time.
thank you very much. So the next item on our agenda is item 9, which is our import applications. We are going to handle them a little bit differently today. I think the vice chairman is going to give his technical reports on all of the import applications, which is A through F on item 9. If any of you want to pull any of those out and discuss them separately, please just let us know that. Otherwise, they're going to be treated as a group today with a single motion after he gives his technical report. If that concerns anybody, speak now. If not, we will turn it over to the vice chairman to give us his technical reports on the import applications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The technical committee has received and reviewed, in this case, 6 import applications, and I'll go through all 6 and then make one motion as Brandon indicated. The first import is from Thomas Gray & Associates, doing business as Environmental Management Controls. It was received September 18, 2023, and it's number 1-0414-00. In this case, Thomas Gray is a broker who is a licensed waste collector and processor requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. And they have specifically requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C, stable and unstable, discrete items, macro-encapsulated, stabilized in concrete, depleted uranium, and low-level radioactive waste. And those waste streams were approved for disposal at the WCS facility via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. They have requested authorization for 2,000 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 1,000 curies. The WCS did send a letter recommending approval of this import request. The applicant has indicated the waste will come from a very long list of states, and I'm actually not going to read that into the record today, but it's available. And I would note that those states include the Southwestern and Rocky Mountain compacts, and so any waste from those states in those compacts will require export authorizations, and we will also require generator authorizations for any of that waste. And so in this case, Thomas Gray will be required to provide those to the administration prior to any shipment of that material.
I have a question before you leave this one. On their application, usually we grant these on our fiscal year. This one says is requesting for date approved 1 year from date of approval. So are we going to correspond that to our fiscal year?
Yes, I note that in the technical review, and we won't grant a year from today.
Okay.
The applicant has indicated the waste to be from small quantity generators, and also that some of that waste will be self-generated. The applicant provided sufficient information to satisfy the commission regarding the self-generated waste. And based on the requested volume, curies, and generator types, the commission concurs that the waste can be accounted under a small quantity generator set aside, so long as none of that waste is from a nuclear power facility. Additionally, as was pointed out, the applicant has requested a 1-year agreement from the date of approval. However, the commission's practice is we do not grant agreements that extend over the fiscal year. And so the agreement would be for the rest of this fiscal year with the termination date of August 31, 2024. The technical committee recommends approval of this application, and then I'll move to the next one.
Yes.
Give me a moment to get there. The next application was from Southern Nuclear Operating Company, Plant EI Hatch. It was received October 9, 2023, and it's number 1-0415-00. In this case, Plant Hatch is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have requested authorization for Class B and Class C unstable irradiated hardware, such as control rod blades, local power range monitors, dry tubes, velocity limiters, and other miscellaneous metal equipment or metal components. Those waste streams were approved for disposal at the WCS facility via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. They've requested authorization for 200 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 30,000 curies. Again, WCS sent a letter recommending approval of this import request. This waste will originate from Georgia, was part of the Southeast Compact, and so it does not require export authorization. The applicant has requested a 1-year agreement with a termination date of August 31, 2024. And I will note that if approved, this application request will have to be treated as under our contingent curie program because it does exceed the 15,000 curie limit. And the technical committee recommends approval of this application.
John, can I interject just briefly? I'm sure all of you have heard this a million times. The contingent curie program is a function of the cap that we currently have on the amount of curies that can be imported in a single year is set by statute being 275,000. We found that in many instances, especially with irradiated hardware, the measure of those curies is difficult. So oftentimes they're overstated. So we contingently grant the right to import that waste with those curies associated with it, under the belief that by the time they get ready to ship, the actual number of curies is quite a bit less, and we never get close to our 275 cap. But we do that so we can, in fact, grant import applications that exceed the 275,000 curies, knowing that they'll never actually come to fruition. But this is the way that we kind of handle a paper problem in practicality. So just as a reminder, since John mentioned it. Thank you, John.
Sure. The next import application is from Southern Nuclear Operating Company, Plant EI Hatch. It was received October 9, 2023, and it's number 1-0416-00. Again, Plant Hatch is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. And in this case, they've requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C unstable mechanical filters. And that waste stream was approved for disposal at the WCS facility via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. They've requested authorization for 150 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 100 curies. Again, WCS sent a letter recommending approval of this import application. The material will come from Georgia, which is part of the Southeast Compact and does not require export authorization. And the agreement would be would basically be a 1-year agreement from today's date, but it will have a termination date of August 31, 2024. The technical committee recommends approval of this import application. The next import application is from Entergy Operations Grand Gulf Nuclear Station. It was received October 30, 2023, and it's number 1-0417-00. In this case, Grand Gulf Station is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class B and Class C unstable irradiated hardware consisting of fuel channels, control blades, LPRM, stellite baskets, dry tube pieces and drums, NI canisters, and a jet pump. Those waste streams were approved for disposal at the WCS site via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. In this case, the applicant has requested a volume of 400 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 85,000 curies. WCS did send a letter recommending approval of this import application. The applicant has requested a 1-year agreement, which will have a termination date of August 31, 2024. And again, this application, if approved, will be treated as contingent under our contingent curie program because it does exceed our 15,000 curie limit. The technical committee recommends approval.
I have a question on this one. It's kind of wrapped into what we've talked about on volume before. Do we want to potentially give away this big a block to a single applicant?
So we have a contingent
Yeah.
volume program. This is not large enough, is it?
It's 400 cubic feet.
No, but I'm saying, I'm focused on the 85,000 curies.
Oh,
But I'm saying they're kind of interrelated. We talked about volume, concerns giving so much out to one person. Do we want to give away potentially 85,000 of 275 to one applicant?
and I think this is the way we have always
Yeah.
viewed it, and I guess this is a good time as any to have the discussion. We have always said that basically it's a first come, first served basis.
Right.
And so the reason we've done that is because, truth be told, we've never really gotten to 275 anyway. So we don't want to restrict someone from bringing curies to the facility based on something that's not likely to ever happen. Now, it's a large volume of curies, and I'm sure John can explain to us why it is that large a volume of curies. But if we have a question about whether or not that's a legitimate number, or if it's just unreasonable in general, I think now is the time to have that discussion. My personal opinion is, and John and Linda and Lisa may have a better grasp on this, that 85,000 curies could be as little as 5 or 10 by the time it's all said and done. And we just don't know. And so I don't know if this is something where we need to go back and maybe inquire of the generator and say, is that 85,000 legit? Are you picking a number out of thin air? Or is it something that we need to drill down on? Because it is something that, and this may involve Mr. Carlson's opinion too, but if somebody showed up in the next month and had 85,000 curies of waste to dispose of,
That's 30%.
do we think that is wrong from an allocation of the limited curies that we get every year from based on the Texas statute?
And I want to say for the record, my question in this dialogue is not specific to this particular individual applicant. It's a policy question for us. Like I said, it became, we started having to grapple with it on the volume side, but now I'm kind of saying similar policy question. Do you get into A, is it realistic to ask? B, if it happened, then how's that leave us sitting for remainder of the year?
And
that
we
kind of
we
question.
have granted
Yeah,
curie allocations like this on the contingent basis of 85,000 before. And we've, as far as I can recall, never gotten anywhere near one person using that many.
I would say last year, Steve Rand's executive director, last year, this Entergy Grand Gulf asked for 160,000 curies.
Yeah.
Because they were gonna, remove some control plays actually, and, that they had in the cooling pool. And I think they only delivered, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Carlson, maybe 50,000 or 60,000. I don't think it was more than that was all that they actually delivered. So but it wasn't near close to the 160,000 that they asked for.
And I understand what Jeff's question is. The question is, if for some reason they do show up and they bring these numbers of curies as a matter of policy of this commission, do we think that's right to give them that big a chunk of what
Yeah.
we have to use every year?
Exactly.
So one thing to remember is you cannot ship 85,000 curies in one shipment. There isn't a cask made that can hold 85,000 curies and put it on the highway legally. So it literally would be impossible for the applicant to send 85,000 curies in one shipment. This will be, if they were to ship 85,000 curies, it will be many truckloads of material. And so it would be many casks. In terms of whether 85,000 curies is an accurate number, my suspicion is, as other nuclear power plants do it, they're making their best guess estimate of the activity of the materials. But those materials have not been put into a shipping container yet. They likely haven't even been segmented yet. And so as they segment those materials, it will allow them to better estimate the actual number. But early in the year, they want to go ahead and get an authorization so that they don't have to come back and ask for an amendment to say, well, we only asked for 50,000 and now it turns out it's 85,000. And so they have to go through an amendment process.
And I will say historically, and again, John, correct me if I'm wrong, other than maybe one of the first couple of years that the facility was taking waste, we've never gotten within 40 or 50,000 curies of the 275 limit. So, I mean, so the two competing arguments in my mind are, we don't want to exclude someone from using curies that were otherwise go unused.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand your point, which is, but do we want to grant one single party potentially a third of the curies that are allocated for an entire year?
Yeah, it just seemed like, so we faced it with the volume question, so it's kind of now just, I think, heightened awareness, just something for us to watch.
Mr. Carlson, I'm sorry, Lisa.
Yeah, if I could speak on that just a little bit, not that many utilities do a fuel pool campaign in a year. So what you're seeing when there's a lot of curies is it's a boiling water reactor, and less than half the reactors in the country are boiling water reactors. It's a boiling water reactor doing a fuel pool clean out. Now what that tends to be is control rod blades coming from that reactor. The other thing I can say is that they have to base their estimates that they submit to y'all based on previous fuel pool campaigns, and that's how they do it. So even things like control rod blades, if you have a previous generation of GE control rod blades, and then you have a later generation of GE control rod blades, you're going to have less dose from the later generations than you do from the earlier generations, just because they were able to reduce the amount of metals in those control rod blades, those kind of things. So I think the utilities are not trying to overestimate ever, but they estimate for the entire campaign, which they may not complete. They estimate from their best historical information, which may not, fit the current condition, and they'll learn more as they go on. And certainly it does happen usually before they've even started processing, meaning cutting up the control rod blades and putting them into packages. So because of the small amount of fuel pool clean out events in a typical year, and because of they're kind of forced to overestimate, or what we might call overestimation, conservatism on their part, because they could hit that number. That's how we get into that situation, but we've never come close. 30% is a pretty good metric to apply to say we tend to say about 30% of what's approved. Thank you.
Lisa, you wanted to say something? I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask, I'm the data girl, so I wonder if we could go back and sort of create a profile that says, for irradiated hardware shipments, this is what we usually see. And this is what they requested. This is what we typically get. And there'll probably be a handful of those that stand out because they're a spent fuel pool cleanup, which is likely to have, I think it would be likely to have a lot more curies. And I don't know, it's just a way of sort of putting it in our head. How much do we usually actually get from these types of
And
shipments?
obviously, a lot of these large cleanup issues are dictated by a lot of things other than just the science behind it too. It's sometimes it's a money issue, sometimes it's a logistics issue, sometimes it's, so saying they want 85, I assume is the absolute extreme case scenario, which rarely happens. But to your point, maybe that needs to be part of the contingency that we include in our contract with Grand Gulf when we sign it, is not just that it's contingent on the curies being available, but it's contingent on us having a good faith belief that those curies won't be needed by others throughout the remainder of the year, and do some sort of cutoff where we say after whatever that amount is, half of what they asked for. Once we get past that, it's subject to not only them being available, but also our good faith estimation that no one else is going
What
to need
else,
them.
what other needs are forecast?
I know what that, it's not a problem.
John, is that, in your opinion, is that cutting someone off when we shouldn't, or is that reasonable?
I guess I have mixed feelings about that, because that's the whole reason we have the contingent curie program to begin with, which is, even though they've asked for 85,000, our approval is contingent. So really, we're not approving, we're approving zero curies. We're saying they have the opportunity to ship up to 85,000 if they get in, if their place in line comes up and those curies are available and all of that. So I think we already have a number of measures in place to help ensure that curies are available to people that need them. And so, we set the limit at 15,000, but in this case, they get approved for zero. They have to ask for every curie that they actually want to ship.
So Stephen just brought up a point that's probably important, because you just mentioned it, and I want to make sure everybody understands. The curie release program is actually a documented process whereby, as John said, really they're granted the authority to ship zero, but they are giving these curies on a contingent basis where they come to us, say, we're ready to ship. Here's a new and accurate depiction of what's going to be in that shipment. And then the request to us is, are those curies available to be disposed of? And we send back a letter saying, yes, those are available. The other thing to remember about where we are in our disposal year is that historically, from this point forward, going through to the end of our disposal year that ends in August, we don't tend to get as many big requests. All those requests tends to come at the beginning of the year in September. So that's the other thing that, to me, lessens maybe the impact of this, is that I'm not saying, I'll never say never, but the odds of us getting a more large request for curies in import requests are probably less than they would have been had this come before us, say, in September or even October.
How many have we approved to date for this
How many
curies?
curies?
Just ballpark.
Do you mean actually approved for them to ship, or do you
No,
mean
on our
contingent?
permitting.
Under the contingent per curie program, I don't think I have that spreadsheet with me, but it's in excess of 300,000, I believe. But they're all contingent, so really, they're listed
Well,
as
it should be on
contingent, so
the
we've approved zero.
WCS.
Yeah. Oh, I
The
get that.
actual approved curies for people to ship,
Yeah,
I want to say is maybe 35 or 40,000,
Okay.
something like that. It may not
About
be quite that high.
15% of where we are.
Yes,
got,
we have ample curies.
Yeah.
according to the chart from WCS report, it's 241,595 curies. And I'm sure that's accurate.
And then if you go out and cut out everything that's in the contingent curie, I think John's right. It's
It's a pretty small
a
number.
pretty small number.
Actually approved for disposal.
Of that, TVA is 75,000.
And Talon is another 45.
Yeah.
So if you take out those that were clearly in the contingent curie program, I think the actual authorized curies to be shipped right now are probably less than 50 is my guess.
Yes.
So in some ways, my only concern is we've set a precedent already by granting some of these that have already been pretty large.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we can change now. If we want to change it at the beginning of the next disposal year and have that discussion, it may be to give everybody fair warning and fair and equal treatment. That may be the way to do it. Any other questions before we let John move on to item E? All right, I think we can move on.
The next import application is from Energy Solutions LLC, acting on behalf of San Onofre Nuclear Generating Station. It was received October 31, 2023, and it's number 1-0418-00. In this case, ES San Onofre is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They have requested authorization for Class B and Class C unstable, segmented, irradiated hardware and contaminated components, and those waste streams were approved for disposal at the WCS facility via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. They have requested a volume of 222.4 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 254 curies. WCS sent a letter recommending approval of this import request. This waste will originate from California, was located in the Southwestern Compact, and will require an export authorization. And they have requested an agreement with the termination date of August 31, 2024. The technical committee recommends approval of this import request. And next one. I believe this is the final import request, was from Xcel Energy Prairie Island Nuclear Plant. Was received November 9, 2023, and it's number 1-0420-00. In this case, Xcel Prairie Island is a generator requesting authorization to dispose of waste in accordance with the Act. They've requested authorization for Class A, Class B, and Class C stable and unstable bead resin, cartridge filters, and radioactive waste. Those waste streams were approved for disposal at the WCS facility via letter correspondence from TCEQ dated November 21, 2023. They've requested authorization for 1,000 cubic feet and a total radioactivity of 300 curies. WCS sent a letter recommending approval of this import request. That waste will originate from Minnesota, which is part of the Midwest Compact and does not require export authorization. And actually, the applicant requested this waste be considered under a small quantity generator set aside, which I suspect was a typographical error on that part. However, in any case, the commission does not consider a nuclear power facility to be qualify for that set aside. And it would be an agreement with the termination date of August 31, 2024, and the commission recommends approval of this import application. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on any of the applications, the 6 applications that I've gone through.
So are there any questions of the technical committee on items 9A through F? Hearing none, I think we can move on to an omnibus motion.
So I make a motion to approve the 6 import applications as listed on the agenda, items A through F, with the stipulations that I indicated during my technical review.
So let me ask, does anyone have any objection to treating these 6 items, item 9A through F, as a group? Would anyone like to pull any of those items out? Hearing none, we can move on to a second. Is there a second to the vice chairman's motion?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about any of the import applications listed in item 9A through F? Any public comment on items 9A through F? I hesitate to recognize him, but Dan Schrum has his hand up.
John, would you restate the volume and carries for Southern Nuclear 415? I thought I heard you say something different.
Perhaps could have. Let me get back there to it.
Done it wrong. You do
Yeah.
a great job. It's just, I agree.
I could.
It's too late, Shrum. You've already made him mad. Don't try to back off now.
All right, I got to get back to those. Apologize.
The first Southern Nuclear application, correct?
Or-
I heard you say 200. And I think it was 290.
415, did you say?
Yeah, 415.
Okay, I'm almost there then.
290 and 30,000 curies.
Yeah.
All right,
There you go.
for 415 1-0415-00, the my indication is 200 cubic feet. Perhaps that's a typo.
I think on the application it's 290.
So let me first apologize for my fingers' inability to type properly. And I appreciate Dan bringing that to our attention. The volume for 1-0415-00 is 290 cubic feet.
Okay.
Perfect.
With that amendment to the motion, is there any objection? So there's been a motion and a second with a correction by Mr. Shrum. And is there any further discussion about the motion to approve all 6 of the import applications represented in item 9? Any other public comment? Seeing no hands raised. We can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the 6 import applications represented in item 9A through F, as described by the chairman of the technical committee, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Let me stop. We are now at the noon hour. I would think that the remainder of the agenda is about 30 minutes.
Mhm.
So does everyone want to keep going, or do we want to take a lunch break?
Keep going.
Okay, well then with that, we'll move on to item 10 on the agenda, which is amendments. And I'll turn it back over to the vice chair.
The technical committee has received and reviewed an amendment request from Wolf Creek Nuclear Operating Corporation that was received October 18, 2023. It's number 1-0383-01. And in this case, Wolf Creek has requested to amend the import agreement to add more volume. Due to upgraded process equipment, they need to ship more volume they had originally requested, and they have requested to increase the volume by 200 cubic feet. So the new revised total will be 900 cubic feet. There were no other changes to the agreement that were requested. WCS did send a letter recommending approval of this amendment request, and the technical committee recommends approval.
Are there any questions for the technical committee on the first amendment request from Wolf Creek represented in item 10A on our agenda? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion to approve the amendment request from Wolf Creek. I believe it's number 1-0383-01, and that will add 200 cubic feet of volume to their import agreement.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 10A, the amendment request of Wolf Creek? Any public comment on item 10A? Hearing none, we can move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the amendment request of Wolf Creek represented in item 10A in our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Motion passes. We can now move on to item 10B, which is the amendment request of ADP CR3. I'll turn it back over to John.
Technical committee has received and reviewed an amendment request from ADP CR3. It's was received November 1, 2023, and it's number 1-0396-01. And ADP has requested to add more volume. They have an acceleration of their D&D operations, and they need to ship more waste than they had originally planned. They want to increase the volume by 4,000 cubic feet. So the new revised total would be 20,200 cubic feet. There were no other changes requested in the amendment request. WCS did send a letter recommending approval of this amendment request. And I would note that this volume increase. The original volume was being treated under our contingent volume program, and then obviously this increase would be treated the same way. The tech committee does recommend approval of this amendment request.
And as a quick reminder, based on what we believe are only paper concerns, but nevertheless, they are on paper. There's a mathematical problem with the amount of volume left in the current cell and the requests that we are receiving. To guard against that, anyone over a certain volume level that requests it, we grant those cubic feet on a contingent basis, just like we do with Curies. So that is what John was referencing. The process though and Stephen's going to talk about this in a minute, but the process for that is much more informal, and it's done via email and is done hopefully within 24, but I think we give ourselves up to 72 hours. But that has been working well, and Stephen will talk about it in a minute. But that is the contingent volume program that John just mentioned. So with that, is there any other questions of the technical committee on the import amendment of ADP CR3? Hearing none, I think we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion to approve the amendment request from ADP CR3. That's number 1-0396-01. And that will increase the volume by 4,000 cubic feet.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about item 10B, the import amendment request of ADP CR3? Any public comment on item 10B? Seeing none, we will move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the import amendment request of ADP CR3 represented in item 10B on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. With that, we are through with item 10. We can move on to item 11 on our agenda, which is the export applications, and where there's only one, and it is from Bionomics. And we will turn it over to John to give us a brief description of what Bionomics is asking to export.
So Bionomics has requested export authorization on behalf of Thermo Finnegan LLC, who's an industrial generator. In this case, those materials would amount to 7.5 cubic feet, which is basically 155-gallon drum. The amount of radioactivity, I'll never be able to get these. It's 0.00. Sorry.
Less than one.
It's a very small number, many zeros and a 1.
6 zeros.
I touched my screen to try to get it and it messes it up. The material's Class A. This material would be exported to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek facility, and the material would be incinerated with eventual disposal at the Energy Solutions facility in Clive. The material consists of scintillation vials with non-hazardous cocktails, and Bionomics has indicated the permissible liquids exceed the levels that are allowed at WCS. And I believe it's generally the indication of WCS that this material is not something they're necessarily interested in disposing of. The technical committee recommends approval of this export authorization, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for the technical committee on the export application of Bionomics?
And Mr. Carlson, I assume you have no objection to this one.
Any other questions? Hearing none, we can move on to a motion.
I make a motion to approve the export request from Bionomics on behalf of Thermo Finnegan LLC. It's for 7.5 cubic feet. Material will go to the Energy Solutions Bear Creek facility. It's Class A waste, and it's a very small radioactivity. Looks like probably less than 1 millicurie.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion about the export application of Bionomics represented in item 11A on our agenda? Seeing none, any public comment? Again, seeing none, we move on to a vote. All in favor of the motion to approve the export application of Bionomics represented in item 11A on our agenda, please indicate so by saying aye.
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 All opposed, no. Motion passes. With that, we are through with item 11, and we can now move on to item 12, which is the chairman's report. And every time we have a chairman's report, I start off with this, and thankful that Dan Schrum is here. Our next low-level forum meeting is in, so again, that is always informative. It's always good to go and see our other compacts. So if anyone's interested in doing that, please let us know. And do we have a keynote speaker yet? Okay. Obviously, they won't be able to match the last keynote speaker, who was our very own Commissioner Bradford. So, we'll hold them to that standard going forward. But otherwise, we are still in regular communication with our other compacts. We have put an emphasis on that over the last several years, and it's working out to, I think, pay dividends. We have regular lines of communication with many of our compacts, especially those that require export authorizations to import waste here. So we have been very openly communicative with them, which has been very beneficial. We also talked to them about the various problems we all face, and it's amazing how we can solve problems better when we all communicate with one another. So that has been very well received. The next item is legislative update. At least for this calendar year, obviously, we think we're through with the Texas Legislature special sessions. There may be more in the new year, but in the past special sessions, there has been nothing that has really impacted us in our operations. We will continue, obviously, to monitor what goes on with the legislature. And if nothing else, our next legislative session will start in January of 25, and we will go through our budget process. And I'm sure there will be legislation during that session that may have an impact on us, so we will monitor it closely. The last item I kind of already stole my own thunder on. As you heard Mr. Carlson and I both mention, there is the NRC is having a meeting in January to discuss possible changes to 10 CFR Part 61, in particular as it relates to GTCC. I believe it's an online meeting, so everyone can attend remotely. So it would be easy for those of you who want to attend. Dan is keeping us informed on that. He sends out notices, and then I tend to send them to you. If anyone wants to attend, we'd be happy to hear what your thoughts are after we come back from that meeting. Our next meeting will be in February after that meeting, so it will be an opportune time to discuss that if we need to. One last item. We have discussed today the opening of the new cell, which we're all very excited about. One of the things that, learning from our past, we want to do is plan a little more proactively with how we think we need to reserve space in that cell for our in-compact generators. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask our contingency committee, headed by Commissioner Mundy, to take a look at the idea of if we need to make recommendations as to what we suggest should be reserved in that cell for the needs of our in-compact generators. And it's not just maybe the day-to-day needs of the in-compact generators, but even possibly based on the contingency of an unplanned or accelerated decommissioning. So we will look at that because I think there's data out there that we can use to make a very good decision on that. So I know I heap a lot on both our rules and our capacity and our contingency committee, but there's one more for you, Jeff. And we appreciate you being willing to take that on. With that, I think that's all of the chairman's report, and we can now move on to item 13, which is the executive director's report, and I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Commissioners, you have in front of you the capacity spreadsheets that we've been compiling as to what activity has gone on and what you have approved and what is still available. As we've talked about quite a bit today, what's left in the cell that matches up with what has been disposed of from the WCS reports, and we reconcile those regularly for you. As you might look through that spreadsheet, you can see there's some additional information that might actually prove helpful to you, that we have some folks that have not countersigned the agreements that have been sent to them for their offering. But if you have any questions about the spreadsheet, be happy to answer them. Just to let you know, we're getting probably about once or twice a week. We have to approve a capacity disposal or approval for the importation of some waste. It's generally been actually just from two generators, which is ADP and Holtec, as they have regular disposals on that. But we've turned those things around quickly within, as was mentioned earlier, 24 to 48 hours. It's never been a problem for them. And so far, I think it's been going very smoothly. But if anybody has any questions about that, especially those with agreements, we'd be happy to improve the process if that's necessary. But if you have questions about the spreadsheet, let me know. Yes, ma'am.
Not to be a dunderhead, but column 1 says current agreement approved. That's the amount they requested.
Yes, that's what that should be.
Okay, and is there any, if it was a contingent approval, is that annotated anywhere?
I don't have it annotated in that way, but I can.
It's when it's anything over,
15,000 only.
not 15.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, 2,000.
Yes.
I
So
don't
anything over 2,000 cubic feet automatically falls within the contingency program.
Okay, and then the second column, current agreement cubic feet available.
So that's how many, that's how much they have not used.
Okay,
So we're keeping track of what they're actually disposing of, and specifically if you see Holtec, that needs to be updated actually. They've only disposed under 398, but they've got the same as you see that everything available on 397.
would you consider adding a column between column 1 and 2, just so I can be lazy and not do the math in my head
Of course.
that says used? So it'd be approved is what they requested, used, and then remaining.
Net.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Happy to do that. I think I may have a different spreadsheet that's actually doing the math for me on that,
Mhm.
but I'll add that so you can see it in the spreadsheets for the future.
That'd be terrific, because if you put the formulas in right, you just have to update the one used number each time.
You got it. Happy to do it. We'll put it in next time.
And let me brag on our staff a little bit. There was some concern expressed at the very beginning that this would be a cumbersome or maybe even impossible to handle process, and that we wouldn't be able to respond in the timeframes that we had originally promised. And I think what we've seen to date is that we've knocked it out of the park. We have been very responsive, and everyone has gotten their authorization very quickly. And luckily, we haven't gotten close enough to our capacity to have to really crunch too much, but our staff has been incredibly responsive, and I don't think anyone has made any kind of complaints or concerns about the timeliness of that response. So I think everything is going as smoothly as anyone could have expected. So I wanted to brag on everyone about that.
I got one other thing. I agree with everything that Brandon just said. What would be, maybe we could build upon this, and you could add a second page or a second column that it includes the same information for Curies. So current agreement approved on Curies, which is really not approved, right? It's requested. And then used and
Would it be
because
more helpful as a separate spreadsheet on Curies as opposed to capacity, or you want to look at spreadsheet?
to
Two spreadsheets?
Yeah, I agree.
I'll add you, I will add one and we'll put we'll call it a Curie capacity spreadsheet.
same thing. And we just might want to be careful with the words, because they're not all approved, right? They're
Correct.
Some of them are contingent.
Mhm.
I will do that and we'll get that to you for next time.
Perfect.
Any other questions of the executive director?
Well, and is this already being done, Vice
In
Chair, by
John's.
your spreadsheets?
I don't actually track disposed curies. I track requested curies and approved curies and contingent curies, but I do not actually track the what goes into the ground. Stephen is tracking that.
And I would clarify on the discussion earlier that Commissioner Monday asked about, whenever the Curie release that process is done, there's a check with the vice chairman and the chairman before we send out that letter to make sure those Curies are available and where we're at in comparison to the 275 cap. So there is no Curie release letter that's going to be approved if that capacity is not available underneath the cap. We have I think a solid process, Chairman, really
Yeah,
to make
I
sure
agree.
that that's not going to happen. And to make sure they have room underneath their under their agreement as well. That's very best way.
Any other questions for the executive director before we move on? Okay, then that brings us to our final item, which is our future meetings. We understand that Steve Nance wanted to join us today from South Texas Project and couldn't, but they have been very gracious in confirming a date for us of May 16th for a meeting in Bay City at their not at their facility, but in the town where their facility is located, and in one of their meeting areas that they have in town. And we will also be able to take a tour of South Texas the day before. And we appreciate Brian Christian and Eddie and Mr. Nance coordinating all that, because I know that is logistically a bit of a nightmare, but they have done a wonderful job of getting us that opportunity. So that's our May 16th meeting. Our next meeting is actually February 22nd, which is again here in Austin. Usually I say we won't meet unless we need to. Based on the publication of the rule, I am fairly certain we will have that meeting. So if anyone has any concerns about any of the dates, that's February 22nd. The South Texas meeting is May 16th. Then we have gone ahead and, at least for a place filler, identified August 22nd as our next meeting in Andrews, which is something that we always enjoy. And then, of course, our meeting in Vermont, which is currently penciled in for October 17th. So please look at all those dates. And if any of those dates present a problem, please let us know, because those are somewhat flexible, because nothing's in stone yet. The only one that may be in stone is really the South Texas meeting. But other than that, all of those are flexible dates. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
It's not a question, but based on when the meetings are scheduled, we should remember the May 16th agenda will be very long, very long.
Okay.
There will be
Lots of stuff.
significant number of import requests and likely export requests in that meeting,
For the coming disposal year.
Yeah,
coming disposal year.
that's literal. And I was gonna say, it'd be nice to get some of these really big ones. The farther we see those in advance, it kind of helps, I think, with our plan.
I think we'll see a number.
Yeah,
Wouldn't surprise me if we saw 25 or
Yeah.
30 import requests for that.
like we did this year.
Right.
You know,
Miss that meeting.
it's a long day, but it gives us a
Yeah.
better overall picture.
We should plan on starting that meeting early.
Yeah.
Right.
I would add, one of the commissioners pointed out they might have a conflict on the 16th. If the following week would work better for you for the Bay City tour, I think that might still actually be available for May 23rd. But if that works better for you, please let me know, as we can actually move that May 16th date.
Okay. Any other questions about future meetings? Hearing none, then I think we can move on to our final agenda item, which is conclusion. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Yep.
Is there a second?
Yes.
All
Second.
in favor, please indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you all very much, and have a very merry holidays.
Does it make sense to have that, basically, first